Okay, so we're diving in today looking at these sources you sent about something you called human dealing with human games. I actually love that phrase.
Me too. It really captures it, doesn't it? That, the tricky, sometimes great, sometimes frustrating way we all navigate each other.
Totally. And it's interesting because you mentioned these sources, and they seem to connect this idea, this human dealing, to something more scientific.
Yeah, exactly. It lines up really well with what researchers call social interaction.
Social interaction. Okay.
Yeah.
So what does that mean formally?
Well, the APA defines it as basically any process with reciprocal stimulation or response between people. The key word there is reciprocal.
Reciprocal, like back and forth.
Precisely. It's not just one person doing something at someone. It's an exchange. My action prompts your reaction prompts my next one, and so on. Like a conversation or even just catching someone's eye.
Right, okay. Like if I nod at someone and they nod back, that counts.
That's a perfect simple example. And what's really fascinating, and what your sources point to, is how these tiny interactions, these little back and forths, are actually the foundation for, well, everything bigger.
Everything, like what?
Like friendships, family dynamics, all the way up to how whole societies and cultures form and operate. It all starts with these basic interactions.
Wow. So the human games we play every day are kind of the building blocks for huge social structures. That's a cool connection.
It is.
So what's our mission today then? Using this idea of social interaction, what are we trying to unpack from these sources you shared?
We're trying to get at the why. Why do we interact like we do? What pushes us towards cooperation sometimes and competition other times? How much is it our personality and how much is it like the society we're in?
Okay.
And maybe even touch on whether something like AI could help us understand it all better.
Right, the AI angle. Okay, I'm hooked.
Yeah.
Human dealing with human games meets social interaction science. Where do we start digging?
I think the most natural place is way back, the evolutionary roots. Because this isn't just a habit we picked up. The sources really stress that being social is a deep, deep adaptation, crucial for survival, for reproduction.
So being good at these games wasn't just nice, it was literally life or death back in the day.
Pretty much. Think about loneliness. The sources mention it's not just feeling sad, it's a biological alarm bell, like hunger or pain. It signals a fundamental need isn't being met.
That makes a lot of sense. We're wired for connection. So how did we get from that basic need to, well, all the complex social stuff?
Well, over huge spans of time, human groups got bigger, much bigger, and living in larger groups requires more sophisticated social smarts, right? You need to track relationships, understand cues, predict what others might do. Early humans really depended on sharing, on helping raise kids together, on having these networks.
You could almost picture it, right? Sharing food, helping each other out. That was the original human game.
In a way, yeah. Things like gathering around a hearth, it wasn't just practical, it built bonds. But the really interesting puzzle, evolutionarily speaking, is how we manage to cooperate on a large scale with people we aren't even related to.
Yeah, cooperating with strangers. That doesn't always feel like the default setting now.
Right. And that's why it's studied so much. The sources talk about things like reciprocity, I help you, you help me, or maybe I help you, someone else sees I'm helpful and they help me later. That's indirect reciprocity.
Ah, okay. Reputation matters.
Exactly. And then there's cultural group selection, the idea that groups with stronger cooperation norms might have just outcompeted other groups. Plus, the interdependence hypothesis suggests that things like collaborative foraging, needing to hunt together, really pushed the evolution of cooperative skills.
So those early group activities, needing to work together to get food or whatever, were actively shaping our social instincts for cooperation.
That's the idea. But it wasn't all holding hands. Competition is just as fundamental, according to the sources. Fighting over resources, competing for mates. That's always been part of the picture, too.
Right. Limited resources. Got to look out for number one sometimes. So it's this constant tension. Cooperate or compete.
Exactly. It's a dynamic balance. And to really break down the strategies involved in that balance, that's where game theory comes in handy.
Game theory, okay, I've heard of it, but it sounds mathematical.
Yeah.
Like for economists or something, not everyday interactions.
It has its roots there, sure, but the core ideas are super useful for understanding any situation where your outcome depends on what others do. It's basically a formal way to map out these strategic human games.
Okay, map them out how? What are the key parts if you look at a human game through that lens?
You look at the players, who's involved, their strategies, what actions they can take, and the payoffs, what are the outcomes or consequences for each combination of choices. Game theory tries to predict what happens based on that.
Gotcha. Players, strategies, payoffs. Are there, like, different types of games in this framework?
Oh yeah, lots. You have zero-sum games like slicing a pie. My bigger piece means your smaller piece. But many real-life interactions are non-zero sum, where maybe everyone can win or everyone can lose.
Right. Win-win situations or lose-lose.
Exactly. Then there are cooperative games, where players can make binding agreements versus non-cooperative games, where everyone's acting more independently in their own interest. And timing matters too. Simultaneous games, where you choose without knowing the other's move, versus sequential games, where you take turns.
That's a lot of categories. Is there like a solution, a best way to play according to game theory?
Not always a single best way, but a really important concept is the Nash equilibrium.
Nash equilibrium.
Okay. It's a state where everyone has chosen their best strategy, given what everyone else is doing. So no single player can improve their outcome just by changing their own strategy alone.
So it's stable, but maybe not ideal for everyone. Like everyone's stuck doing what's best for them individually, even if it makes the group outcome worse.
That's a great way to put it. Think rush hour traffic. Everyone driving their car might be their best individual choice, but the collective result is gridlock. But traditional game theory kind of assumes we're perfectly rational calculators.
Which we're definitely not.
Exactly. And that's where behavioral game theory comes in. It tries to bring psychology into the mix.
Ah, okay. The human element.
Yeah.
Emotions, biases.
Precisely. It acknowledges we're influenced by feelings, by fairness, by trust, not just cold, hard logic. Our decisions in these games are often shaped by those factors.
Can you give an example, a classic game theory thing that shows this tension?
The prisoner's dilemma is the classic one. You've got two suspects questioned separately. They can confess or stay silent.
Right.
If one confesses and rats out the other, the confessor walks free, the other gets a long sentence. If both confess, they both get medium sentences. If both stay silent, they both get short sentences. Rationally, confessing always seems safest for you, no matter what the other does. But if both stayed silent, cooperating, they'd both be much better off. It shows how hard cooperation can be, even when it's mutually beneficial.
Yeah, that really highlights those moments where self-interest clashes with the potential for a better group outcome. What are some others?
Well, there's the ultimatum game. One person gets, say, $100 and has to propose a split with the second person. If the second person rejects the offer, nobody gets anything.
Ooh, okay.
Rationally, the second person should accept any offer, even $1, because it's better than zero. But people often reject offers they see as unfair, like maybe less than $30 or $40, even though it costs them money. It shows our sense of fairness is powerful.
We'd rather get nothing than accept an unfair deal. Interesting.
Yeah. And the trust game is another good one. One person gets money, decides how much to send to a second person. That amount gets tripled. Then the second person decides how much, if any, to send back.
Ah, testing trust and reciprocity.
Exactly. It reveals a lot about how much we're willing to trust strangers and whether people tend to return that trust.
These games really do feel like simplified versions of everyday stuff. But it's not just the game structure, right? Our own psychology must play a huge role. Our personality, how we're feeling.
Oh, absolutely critical. Who we are as individuals, our traits, emotions, motivations, massively shapes how we approach and react in these social interactions.
So the same situation can trigger totally different responses in different people.
Precisely. And a big part of that is social cognition, basically, how our brains process social information. We notice different things, interpret actions differently based on our own history and mood, make different judgments. That's why you and I might see the exact same interaction and have completely different takes on what happened.
Which explains so many misunderstandings. We're running the same data through different mental software.
That's a good analogy. And then there's how other people influence us. Social influence. That's massive in these human games.
Right, we're not islands. How does that work?
Well, social influence theory talks about different levels. There's compliance, going along to fit in or avoid disapproval, even if you secretly disagree.
Okay, peer pressure, basically.
Kinda, yeah. Then identification, adopting behaviors because you admire someone or want to belong to a group. And the deepest level is internalization, where you genuinely adopt the group's beliefs as your own. These forces are constantly shaping our moves in these games, often unconsciously.
Wow. So we're being nudged and pulled all the time. But what about the why behind cooperating or competing? What drives those basic urges?
Well, for cooperation, beyond reciprocity, empathy is huge, just feeling for the other person. Trust is key too, believing they have good intentions. shared goals, obviously. And cultural norms often push us to cooperate.
So it's not always calculation. Sometimes it's just feeling connected or it being the right thing to do in our group.
Exactly. And competition, often driven by wanting status, needing scarce resources, could be a job, could be attention, or just wanting to measure up well against others. Competition can be motivating, but it also has its downsides, obviously.
You mentioned empathy being key for positive interactions. Why is it so central?
Well, empathy feeling with someone builds trust. It improves communication because you can anticipate how they might feel. It encourages cooperation because you care about their needs. And it helps resolve conflicts because you can genuinely understand their side. It's like the social glue.
Feeling with them. What about just understanding their point of view, even if you don't feel the same?
That's perspective taking, more cognitive. Understanding their thoughts, their angle is also super valuable, helps resolve conflicts, reduces your own biases because you see other viewpoints, makes communication clearer, and it often leads to empathy.
Okay, so individual psychology is a huge piece. But we're all doing this somewhere, right? The context matters, the situation.
Absolutely. You can't understand the human game without understanding the playing field. The social context, the situation, the cultural roles, the roles we're playing dictates the where and when, and often the how of interaction.
So how I talk to my boss is different from how I talk to my best friend, even if we're talking about the same thing. Because the context, the roles are different.
Exactly. And we learn these rules through socialization. That's the lifelong process of absorbing the norms, values, and behaviors expected by our society or our groups. It teaches us how to play the game in different settings.
It's like learning the unwritten rules just by living. What about things like status or the roles we have? Parent, employee, leader.
Huge impact. Social status, whether you earned it or were born into it, and the roles you occupy shape the power dynamics and interactions. Who gets listened to, who has more influence, whose needs get met. It's often tied to status and role. Social stratification, the layers in society, also creates different interaction landscapes for different people.
And culture. That must be massive. What's polite, what's funny, what's offensive varies wildly.
Completely central. Culture provides the script, the norms, values, beliefs, even body language and tone of voice. Understanding that what's normal in one culture might be odd or rude in another cultural relativism is crucial.
So many different versions of these human games playing out across the globe, each with its own rule book. And even within smaller groups, like a work team.
Yep. Another layer. Within any group, you see cooperation towards goals, competition for status or resources within the group, maybe conflict over opinions, group norms develop, leaders emerge, people feel pressure to conform, all influencing the individual interactions within that group context.
It's this incredibly complex dance, then, between us as individuals and all these social layers we're embedded in. And looking at the interactions themselves, they seem to fall on a spectrum, right? Not always just pure cooperation or pure competition.
Exactly right. Human dealing with human games covers a whole range. But we can think about cooperation, competition, and conflict as key points on that spectrum.
Okay, let's define those quickly. Cooperation is
working together for shared goals, mutual benefit, teamwork, helping, collaborating.
Competition.
Striving for limited goals that can't really be shared, outperforming others, rivalry for resources or status.
And conflict.
That's more active opposition. Incompatible goals, maybe a struggle for power or resources, where one side's gain is seen as the other's loss.
But you said it's a spectrum. They can mix, right?
Yeah.
Like cooperating within your team to compete against another team.
The perfect example. They're not always separate boxes. They blend, they shift. A friendly competition can turn into a nasty conflict if things go wrong. A conflict might eventually lead to cooperation if a common enemy appears. It's fluid.
It really highlights how dynamic these games are. And it feels like there are moral questions tangled up in all this, right? How we should play these games. Ethics.
Definitely. You can't really talk about dealing with human games without bumping into ethics. Questions of right and wrong, fairness, responsibility, they're woven throughout.
Even in cooperation. That seems like the good one.
Mostly, but you can still ask, is a cooperation fair? Is trust being respected? Are we cooperating to do something unethical, like excluding someone unfairly? Competition brings up obvious ethical points about playing fair, being honest, not causing undue harm.
And conflict must be loaded with ethical issues.
Absolutely, especially when it involves potential harm. Justifying actions, protecting non-participants, treating opponents with some level of respect, even in disagreement. These are all major ethical considerations.
It's interesting to think how these games have unfolded over time. Have the basic ways we interact changed dramatically throughout history.
The core drives, cooperate, compete, manage conflict, are probably ancient. But how we do it, the specific rules, the tools we use, like, social media now, the scale of interaction that evolved hugely with society and technology. Interactions in a small village are vastly different from interactions in a globalized digital world.
And it shapes us individually too, right, from when we're babies.
Absolutely. Social interaction is fundamental to human development. Learning language skills, emotional regulation, understanding the world, it all happens through interaction. It's not just part of development. It drives development throughout our lives.
So our interactions literally build who we are. And they don't just affect us, they ripple outwards.
Precisely. The way we play these human games impacts our own well-being, sure, but also shapes our relationships, our families, our workplaces, and ultimately contributes to the culture and functioning of society as a whole. Good interactions build social capital. Bad ones can erode it.
Okay, so if these interactions are so important and sometimes so tricky, are there things we can actually do to get better at them, to encourage the positive outcomes?
Yes, definitely. The sources mention several evidence-based approaches. Things like structured cooperative games can build teamwork skills. Role-playing different social scenarios helps build empathy and practice responses. Training and recognizing emotions in ourselves and others and consciously practicing perspective-taking can make a big difference.
So we can actually train ourselves to be more socially skilled.
To a degree, yes. Education is key. Formal social skills training, programs focusing on emotional intelligence, understanding and managing emotions, and even ethics education can equip people better.
What about when conflict does arise? Any specific techniques?
Sure, things like active listening, really trying to hear the other person out without just planning your rebuttal, reframing issues to find common ground, consciously trying to see it from their perspective. These are core skills in conflict resolution and mediation. And dealing with power imbalances often involves fostering open communication, maybe shared decision-making, and setting clear boundaries.
It really comes back to empathy and perspective-taking again and again, doesn't it?
It really does seem to be a cornerstone for navigating these interactions more constructively.
Now, one last area you mentioned earlier, AI. How might artificial intelligence fit into understanding or even improving these human games?
Well, there's potential there. AI is getting better at analyzing vast amounts of interaction, data, text, audio, video to spot patterns, maybe identifying emotional cues, sentiment, potential biases in communication.
So AI could analyze a meeting transcript for underlying tensions or something like that.
Potentially, yes. Or think about applications like personalized social skills coaching delivered via AI, tools to help mediate online disputes, or even AI companions to alleviate loneliness, though that last one is controversial.
But there must be huge limitations, right? AI doesn't feel empathy.
Exactly. Understanding genuine human emotion, intuition, sarcasm, cultural nuance, context, AI struggles immensely with that. It can mimic, but it doesn't understand in the human sense.
And the ethical concerns must be massive.
Oh, absolutely. Privacy issues with analyzing our interactions, algorithmic bias creeping in, the risk of dehumanizing interactions if we rely too much on AI intermediaries, eroding genuine connection. These are really significant ethical hurdles we need to consider carefully as the technology develops.
This has been incredibly insightful. Taking that phrase, dealing with human games, and seeing it through the lens of social interaction, evolution, psychology, society, it connects so many dots.
It really does. It shows that your intuition about these games taps into something fundamental about being human. It's this constant interplay between our inner worlds and the social environments we navigate, playing out on that spectrum from cooperation to conflict.
Yeah. The evolutionary roots, the psych factors, the social rules, the ethics. It's a lot to take in, but it makes sense of so much.
Hopefully it provides some aha moments connecting those everyday experiences to these bigger ideas.
Definitely. So maybe a final thought for you listening to this. As you go about your day, navigating your own human games, how might understanding these dynamics, the deep needs, the strategies, the context, change how you approach them? Maybe just noticing the specific games you find yourself in, the ones that are easy, the ones that are challenging, and asking why might be a powerful next step.
This is DigitView.